Excuse me. Oh, really? Excuse me. You lay down. Am I going? Bracken, lay down, please. Lay down. Good girl. Hello, and welcome to episode 1 of the Energetic English podcast. I'm Rob, and before I get into the meat of the podcast, I would just like to explain how I arrived at such a strange title. Now, many of my students were asking me, do I know of an English language podcast with a British accent? They'd like to get to know the British accent better. So I thought, well, this presents an opportunity for me to produce something and assist my students' learning. So I thought, what are good key themes for podcasts? And I thought, well, interviews are good. So I will find some colleagues to interview. So none of my colleagues were available to interview. I was presented with a situation similar to Castaway with Tom Hanks. He's marooned on this desert island, no one to speak to. So Tom Hanks finds a tennis ball and befriends this tennis ball and calls him Wilson. So the challenge was set. I needed to find a Wilson to co-host the podcast with me. But my Wilson isn't called Wilson. My Wilson is called Bracken, affectionately known as Brax. And she's a dog. So, episode 1, this is the DOGcast. Right, I will properly introduce my co-host. So, as I've already told you, her name is Bracken, or affectionately known as Brax to her friends. She is a Staffordshire Bull Terrier, cross Hungarian Vizsla, cross Patterdale Terrier. She's greedy. She's 6 years old, which in human years is about 42. It is here in the UK at least. And she likes long walks on the beach. She likes to relax in front of the fire on a night time, and she likes to play ball. Her dislikes include, although aren't limited to, vegetables, cats, although I say that one quietly, and the rain, which is rather odd for a dog. I would say her strengths are she's a great listener, really good listener. But perhaps a weakness of hers, perhaps an area for development is, sleeping pattern. She's a light sleeper. You talk in your sleep, don't you, darling? Lots of snoring and barking and woofing. So Brax is going to be my co-host, and we're going to talk about some fairly interesting topics. Right, okay, so you might be wondering, why have I chosen dogs for a first topic for a British English podcast? Well, like many other countries in the world, dogs form a very central part of the culture and home life, our day-to-day life. We walk them, we run with them, we pamper them, we groom them, we talk to them, we love them very much. Brax, if you move, they're going to know that I've edited it, okay? Now, we don't have to look too far to find examples of dogs within British culture, at the very centre of it. A few famous examples might be Her Majesty the Queen. She's had more than 30 corgis since the start of her reign. Or Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill had a bulldog named Dodo. And this is sort of partly responsible for the British brand with the British Bulldog, which is very famous throughout the world. So, what are they to the normal British household? Why are dogs so important? You'd be forgiven for thinking that as a human guest into a house with a dog, that you would rank perhaps higher on that pecking order than the dog. Well, you'd be wrong. I have several friends whose houses I visit, and they have various breeds of dog, Rottweilers, Staffordshire Bull Terriers, and they have a particular place on the sofa on the settee, on the couch. And it is expected that I, as a human guest to the house, maneuver around the dog, okay, rather than disturbing the dog as it sleeps peacefully on the sofa. A second example might be the dog's tea time or dinner time or walks time, or time to walk the dog. We have set routines. Dogs respond to routine, as we all know. And if it is time for the dog to eat, or if it is time for the dog to be walked, then that is the absolutely most important thing that is to happen at that time. It doesn't matter if the house is on fire, the dog must be fed first. Bracken is doing really well. I'm just going to give her a treat. Yeah. Hey, Brax, yeah. On this one. Maybe. We made a deal this morning that if she was going to co-host this podcast with me, I've just given her a treat for those people listening on podcast. We made a deal this morning that if she was going to co-host this podcast with me, I would treat her to a long walk and treats throughout the show. And then I would give you something, some perhaps gravy on top of her dinner this evening, and you've been very good, so thank you very much. You've been doing absolutely remarkably. Thank you, darling. And perhaps finally, to demonstrate how important dogs are in the British culture, we've actually managed to get them into our language, our expressions, our idioms. And we'll run through a few now. Well, the first one that springs to mind is it's a dog's life. It's a dog's life means that something is miserable and sort of unpleasant. It's an old expression. You're working 24/7. It's low paid. The weather's rubbish. You've got to be outside all the time. You'd say, it's a dog's life, which is actually quite the opposite to this dog's life, at least, which seems quite comfortable indeed, isn't it, darling? Yes. Another expression to do with dogs could be that a dog's bark is worse than its bite. For example, my friend in the morning, his bark is worse than his bite. It means that he seems more aggressive or hostile than he actually is. So his bark is worse than his bite. The third one could be that it's a dog-eat-dog world out there. This means that it's highly competitive out there. It's quite a survival situation. You may say this to a young person going into the world of work, where you would say to them, look, it's a dog-eat-dog world out there, so you must work hard. And then finally, you're barking up the wrong tree. You're barking up the wrong tree. Now, this means that you are perhaps pursuing the wrong course of action. For example, I might say, hey, John, you took my screwdriver from me. And he says, you're barking up the wrong tree. Actually, it was Philip. So I would be barking up the wrong tree by thinking and asking that John is to return my screwdriver. I would be in the wrong place. So barking up the wrong tree. So I hope you can see now just how important dogs are within British culture. It leaves me to bid you farewell, and from Brax as well, who's worked very hard. I hope you'd agree, and is certainly deserves a rest and some relaxation after such a hard bit of work she's done today. But I think she's been excellent. So thank you, darling, for co-hosting with me. If you have any comments or ideas, any feedback, please put them below or get in touch. Please like, comment and share the video and the podcast. If it brought value to you, please share it with someone else so they can benefit too. So from me and Brax, we'll see you next time.